Okay, so I want to begin my talk today by talking about an unfair game. Specifically, I want to talk about Major League Baseball. Now, in the film Moneyball, which is based upon the book by Michael Lewis, the general manager of the Oakland Athletics he succinctly sums up this unfair game. He says, there are rich teams, there are poor teams, there's 20 feet of crap, and then there's us, the Oakland Athletics. Now, as a Pittsburgh Pirate fan, I can definitely sympathize with this, coming from Pittsburgh. Now, Billy Beane wasn't exaggerating. He really was facing an unfair game. But what the Oakland A's did was they started to push something called this new approach, this Moneyball Lesson, as I call it, for improving their practices and how they built a Major League Baseball team. In doing this, they were actually able to do something that no American League team had done prior to that time. They were able to win more than 20 games consecutively, and they're still one of the most efficient teams in Major League Baseball. They purchased a win for about $500,000 versus a big rich club like the Yankees for $1.5 million. Okay? Now, you might be asking yourself, what is this Moneyball lesson? What could make one team that's so small, that's below 20 feet of crap, supposedly, be able to compete so well? To compete with these teams that are so much more richer? And the lesson, the Moneyball lesson, is as simple as it is profound. And it simply is this. Challenge the conventional wisdom about what works, gather evidence, and try to actually figure out if it's true. And that's exactly what they did with the Oakland A's. Now, what I want to argue for you today, since TED Talks are supposed to be about big ideas and big arguments, my big idea, my big argument, is that we need to do the same exact thing when it comes to how we look at intelligence analysis methodologies and tradecraft. We need to think about what works, not to just accept the received wisdom. Now, some people might say, I remember talking to someone and I was talking about how would you evaluate argument mapping, for example. And they said, well, it's a software program. It doesn't mean much. The reason why it matters is this. Intelligence analysis is an unfair game. If you think about it, intelligence agencies only have so much time, only so much money. They only have so much resources. And at the same time, you have threats like this, like the Boston Marathon bombing, that even if you do everything right, still bad things can happen and the bad guys can win. So it's for this reason that we need to think about what the received wisdom is and actually try to go out and test it. So, Exhibit 1. When we think about experience in intelligence analysis, we think about it like in most other professions like Major League Baseball. We think about how you go out and you build a baseball team. The traditional way is you hired scouts who had decades of experience looking at players, and they could make the right call. They could just go out and they could see what was the good baseball player, what the traits were that they had. In intelligence analysis, it's similar. We think that there's a positive and linear relationship between having more experience and being more of an accurate judge. Now, I've kind of come to see, since I've been here for the last day or so, that among the Mercyhurst students, Philip Tedlock's book, Political Judgment, is well known here, it seems, amongst the students. Philip Tedlock actually challenged this. He's a political psychologist, and he asked over 200 experts, the tops of their fields, to make judgments over many years. In fact, 28,000. And what he found was that the curve didn't look like this. The curve actually looked something like this. That there was a diminishing return on how good of a judge you were and how accurate your judgment was. So, what I wanted to do is I wanted to find out if I could do this in an intelligence context. So, what I needed first was people who were I needed people with more experience. And so I pulled the IAFIE listserv, and there's probably some of you in the audience that filled it out. I was looking for folks with experience in studying weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. And I asked them this simple question. I asked 21 people responded. What's the percentage of chemical weapons that would be removed or destroyed by the Assad regime by June 30th? At the same time, I needed people who would stand in as being well-informed. They weren't experts, but they at least were knowledgeable. And so I had 24 graduate students studying public and international affairs at the University of Pittsburgh to answer the same question in the same way. And so what I find is when I look at Pitt versus IAFIE, there is a difference. In terms of IAFIE, 52% versus Pitt, which gave 60% of the weapons destroyed. Now, both sides also gave moderate levels of confidence. But if you look at this, you could say, this is a point prediction. How often does an intelligence analyst really do anything like this? Really the key, like the most important thing I think that intelligence analysts bring is context, right? The reason why they gave the percentages that they gave. And what's really interesting, again, is I find that they're fairly similar, but they're also a little different as well. So what I did was I went through and I looked at all the justifications people gave from the written narratives, and I totaled them all up. And I basically found that 3 reasons were shared as the top 4 reasons across both groups. Now they're rank ordered a little differently, but again, you see that there's a similarity there. Now the implication of this is not to say that experience doesn't matter, but if we really want to bring this Moneyball lesson to intelligence analysis, and we want to try to get every single possible advantage we can, we have to think to ourselves, you know, how far is experience taking us? Do we just hire people on the basis of this, or do we think about other things, like their cognitive reasoning style? Is it more about what you know, or how you think about it? That's one thought. Now, received wisdom number 2. And this could be true for really many methods or intelligence methodologies, is that social network analysis gets your man, right? We create indicators like degree centrality, and we create awesome graphs like this that tell us what the network supposedly looks like. And there are great applications of this methodology, and people are doing great things with it. Like for example, Melanie's presentation earlier today. So you can do great things with this methodology. But we have to be skeptical about what it's telling us. So up here, I have, this is the Al-Qaeda Madrid Singapore attack network. It's from Mark Sacham's data, which is probably the most used terrorism data set in academia. And in here I have what I'm calling the Abu Zubaydah problem. So in the middle of the diagram there, you see Abu Zubaydah. Now supposedly he was the number 3 man in Al-Qaeda for a while, that's what we thought. But it turns out that he wasn't. He was a minor logistics man. So even though he looks connected, he's in the middle of the graph, he's right below OBL, he really wasn't that important in the network. This is but one example. So, again, we can test what the received wisdom is. We don't have to accept it on its face. So Michael Kenny and I, at the University of Pittsburgh, we sought to find out this exact question: how far would social network analysis take us, especially using secondary source data? So what we did was we looked at an Islamist group in the United Kingdom called Al-Muhajirun. And these guys up here, you can tell they're a jolly bunch. The group itself doesn't actually perform any violent operations. However, it's been accused of radicalizing people that later do. So the government has banned the group. And they also have ideological ties with Al-Qaeda. Probably the best known example in the United States of what Al-Muhajirun is capable of, or at least its members, is, if you may recall, there was a British soldier stabbed in daylight in London and beheaded. He was once a member of this group. He attended meetings. So, not a nice group of people. Now, what we did to study the group was we looked at a bunch of secondary source data. We had thousands of articles and reports. And we used that to build like that big kind of picture that I just showed you. And so we could get statistics from it and so on. And that's kind of like a standard social network analysis. But here's what we did that was different. We went to the United Kingdom over the course of 2 years and interviewed every single person in the organization that we can find. In fact, we interviewed 86 people. Everyone from the top, everyone all the way down to the bottom of the organization. So we had a ground truth of what the organization looked like. And Michael Kenny, the person who I did this with, he's a seasoned ethnographer. He actually went on the protests with them. He went to some of their private meetings. So he got a real sense of what the network actually looks like. So when we actually look at the network, we start to see some interesting things. So this is kind of the core of the network. I've taken off any isolates, which are nodes that are by themselves. So this is just the inner core. So the first thing you notice is that somehow Osama bin Laden is in our network. Last I checked, Osama bin Laden is in the United Kingdom. He's been dead for a while. He definitely is someone you look at immediately. Underneath him is Wahri, definitely not a part of the network. But they show up because the data does. Now, you look at something like this, you might think, well, duh, of course he's not in the network. Of course not. But there's people like this, and this is the problem. These are the Abu Zubaydah type people. This is Omar Khayyam. He was arrested. He was arrested as a part of the breaking up of a plot. It was the fertilizer bomb plot. He shows up incredibly high in our network. He shows up at a leadership level. Now, if you think about this from the perspective of you actually want to take kinetic action towards this network and break it up, it makes no sense to go after him. He was a peripheral member. He only attended a few meetings. Now, again, the implication of this is you think about we need every single possible advantage we can get. If we just take the methods on their face value and just assume the method's telling me what's out there, it's true. If we do that, we can actually make mistakes like this. Now, the Moneyball lesson that I'm talking about today, it began with this man, Bill James. And he was the most outside of outsiders possible. When he originally started writing about, testing and trying to figure out what works in Major League Baseball and how to run a successful team, he was the security guard at a bean factory in the Midwest. The man, probably the only time he ever picked up a baseball bat was probably for Little League. So he was the most outside person possible. And it took about 30 years for his writing, for his thought to get into Major League Baseball. And now, almost every single Major League Baseball team employs the kind of practices that I'm talking about. That is, thinking about what works and actually getting evidence and testing it, not just believing without actually gathering the evidence. In intelligence analysis, I see a very heartening thing happening now. What I see is, in the last 10 years, there's far more interest in analytic methodology than there ever was before. And a big part of that, of this analytic transformation, is this idea that we care more about methods now than we ever did before. But I think we've only had, when it comes to methods, we've only gone halfway. Because what we have now is we kind of have like a word cloud of all these different methods. There's lots of books, there's lots of information on all these different methods. But what we don't know is who do they work for, under what circumstances. We don't know. We have no idea. We just keep coming up with more tools and more techniques, but what actually works? And that's what I'm trying to bring to you today with my argument, with bringing this Moneyball lesson forward. So, I want to conclude by saying that we're doing things, but we need to do more. Mercyhurst is doing a lot of great work, especially Chris Wheaton testing some of these things. There's been other work other places, but it needs to be put into an institutional framework. And people have called for this. Steve Reber, Randy Fearson, people are calling for this. But at this point, I can tell you from my perspective as a PhD student studying analytic methodology, that there aren't many places for people like me to go. There's not many places to go and just study methods. And I hope that you can see from this presentation how important methods are. They can lead you in the right way and in the wrong way. Because ultimately, what I want to argue here is that intelligence analysis is an unfair game. When we succeed, nobody knows. And when we fail, everybody knows.